Alright guys, believe it or not, we are ready to start period 5 of the APUSH curriculum, which means we are into the home stretch for this first semester because we cover all the way through period 5. And period 5 is mainly geared towards our road to the Civil War, like what happened in the Civil War. Then we're going to look at the course of the Civil War, and then, of course, the after effects, which would be Reconstruction. So we have a lot of stuff to cover, but before we even get to the Civil War, we need to talk about something called manifest destiny. And this is something we've looked at a little bit kind of on the edges so far this year with westward migration. And it's an important topic in and of itself, but it's also going to be an important lead-in to the Civil War itself, because manifest destiny and its desire for more land will set the stage for conflicts over that land and how many of those new territories should be slave or free. So we're going to get into the causes and effects of manifest destiny today, and we're going to first begin by simply defining what manifest destiny is. So manifest means it's something that's obvious and clear. Of course, we all know what destiny is. It's your fate. So manifest destiny is this clear pathway that we're on, our clear and obvious fate as a country. And it's this belief that we have this mission to extend our power and civilization and culture all the way across North America. And for many Americans, this was also religious, this idea that basically this is God-given territory to us, and it's our destiny to fulfill God's plan of having American culture and civilization spread westward across the country. Now, the term manifest destiny itself is the product of a guy named John L. O'Sullivan, who wrote in the Democratic Review in 1845 that the American claim is by the right of our manifest destiny to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent which Providence has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty. So that's where the phrase comes from, and let's get into some of the causes. Why manifest destiny? Well, before we actually get into the cause, though, I do want to look really quickly at this painting, which is kind of the visual representation of what manifest destiny is all about. We have this woman here representing American and American culture heading westward. And you'll notice she's stringing some telegraph lines with her. We've got the stagecoach heading west. We've got settlers heading west, new farms being built. You've got the cities of the east, including New York City. This would be the Brooklyn Bridge right there. We've got railroads heading out west as well, along with wagon trains. And as we move, you notice the Native Americans are kind of running for their lives. And there's also something kind of symbolic. Notice how bright and sunny it is over here and how dark it is over here, sort of implying that American culture is bringing light to the darkness that we see on the left. So as we talk about the specific causes of manifest destiny, one would be desire to have greater access to natural resources. So there's all kinds of minerals. Obviously, silver and gold will be found out west. And this is a territory that's kind of seen as almost untapped and ready to be used by Americans. So we want to get our hands on all these minerals out west. There's also, for many settlers heading west, this hope for economic and social mobility that, by heading west, you'll get your piece of land. And from there, you can kind of move up in society by doing, having more economic opportunities and just being kind of an independent farmer. We also see what we call Oregon fever setting in the early 1840s. And Oregon fever simply refers to the fact that we have a lot of settlers heading west, and many of them are going to the Willamette River Valley out here in Oregon, very fertile territory. And the way you would get there is by the famous Oregon Trail. Now, you'll notice also there's a Mormon trail that kind of goes with the Oregon Trail. There's also a Californian trail that splits off from it. So you have a lot of these overland trails. Now, these were, pretty big endeavors. You're talking about weeks, actually months on the trail. There's all kinds of dangers and sicknesses abound. And so this is certainly not a guarantee that you're going to make to Oregon, but people are willing to take on the risk to go thousands of miles out into, frankly, really uncharted territory, hoping for a better life. So it just shows you just how deep this feeling of destiny was, that they're willing to risk everything to head out across the plains and the mountains and the deserts to get to their destination. Now, along the way, or on the Oregon Trail, people would have found all kinds of landmarks to kind of guide their path. One of the more famous of these would be Chimney Rock. This was kind of a, as you're heading west on the Oregon Trail, you saw this. It's kind of a landmark. Okay, I know where I'm here, and I've gone this far, and I have this much further to go, and so forth. And again, that's the destination. This rich, fertile Willamette Valley in Oregon, great for opening farms, and you're going to see cities pop up here. Of course, you also have the Columbia River running out to the sea, so you can eventually use the West Coast to export goods across the Pacific and connect it to the East Coast via those clipper ships we're going to look at later. Now, another desire to head west is just freedom of religion and having some more social freedom. A good example of the religious freedom, of course, would be the Mormon exodus from upstate New York west. And then, of course, under the tutelage of Brigham Young, he's going to take the Mormons out all the way to really what was kind of open, barren landscape here around Salt Lake City and turn it into a prosperous, thriving city. Now, another cause behind Manifest Destiny is we wanted to gain control of those Pacific ports because with expanding all the way to the West Coast allows us then to better trade with Asia. Asia, of course, had a very large population, and they might be interested in buying American goods and allowing us to purchase goods from them that we couldn't have here, say like tea or silk or porcelain or something like that. And so by having these port cities, like ultimately places like San Francisco, Los Angeles, and all those other areas, we can then transport more effectively across the vast ocean that is the Pacific. So the final reason is, this kind of goes into the original purpose of Manifest Destiny, this idea that we're going to spread our culture across the continent, because a lot of Americans saw our culture as frankly superior, as something that the people who are already living there should kind of welcome and frankly just give up their old culture and adopt ours, because we have better technology and we see ourselves as kind of like the pinnacles of civilization basically, and we feel we're doing our duty by spreading it westward, whether the people there want it or not. All right, another cause, or in this case, sort of like something that's going to help our settlers, is the Homestead Act, which was passed in 1862. And the Homestead Act was a pretty important moment in American history. If you look back into earlier land acts, it was often designed more to bring in government revenue than it was about settling the land. This time around, though, it's not. We're practically giving this land away, the government is. So it's not about raising revenue. It's more about trying to get people, to encourage people to head west and settle these lands. So under the terms of the Homestead Act, you could get your hands on 160 acres from the federal government as long as you lived on it for 5 years and you did something to improve the land. That might be something as simple as building, your home in a barn, or fencing the land, or digging a water well. You're doing something to improve the land, and then therefore it's yours. You also have to pay a small fee, but as long as you do that, that 160 acres is yours. Now, how we're going to get the settlers out there is through something else that also passed in 1862, which was the Pacific Railroad Act, which is going to set the stage for what we call the Transcontinental Railroad. Now, the original Transcontinental Railroad was a sort of a combination effort. You had the Central Pacific heading eastward from Sacramento, California. This would be the red line on our map here. And then you also had the Union Pacific heading west from Omaha, Nebraska. And ultimately, they're going to meet right up here in northern Utah. Now, that wasn't something that was decided ahead of time. Basically, it was kind of a race to see who could gobble up the most number of miles. And both these railroads are going to get some very helpful subsidies from the government, loans and land grants to help kind of finance the construction of this project. And in fact, you can see the pattern of land grants. These are whole square miles they're going to get in a sort of a checkmarked pattern the railroads are going to get. And once the railroad is constructed and cities start to pop up and farms are settled, that land will become very valuable. So basically, we're giving land away that was not worth much of anything to these railroads who then can kind of borrow on that land because they know it'll have a value later that they can sell for a profit. So that's our first transcontinental railroad, but there will be others. You can see there's one up here in the north. We have one down, actually two in the south that will be constructed as well. Another consequence of the transcontinental railroad would be our time zones. So our modern day time zones, they've obviously, the borders have shifted a little bit from the original setup, but those are the result of the railroads as well. Because all of a sudden, minutes mattered. Whereas before, wherever it's high noon, 50 miles away, 100 miles away, it didn't matter if the clock was off by a couple minutes compared to where you're at. But with trains, it does, because trains are traveling so much faster than horses and people can walk. And so, therefore, to keep the timetable right with the trains and avoid things like collisions and trains being early or late, you had to have standardized time within these zones. All right, the final moment here of the original transcontinental railroad came near Ogden, Utah, at a place called Promontory Point, with the famous golden spike being driven into the tie there, and the spike and the rail and everything, all this had been wired to telegraph, so that the moment they hammered that last spike in, it would send a signal across the telegraph to the rest of the country, letting everyone know that the transcontinental railroad was finished. There's a picture of the meeting of the two railroads as they finished up. Now, with the transcontinental railroads being constructed, this is going to increase settlement way beyond anything like the Oregon Trail was, because now you're not really risking that much heading west. Railroads were pretty safe, and they were remarkably fast compared to the old wagon trails. And so all of a sudden you have thousands and thousands and thousands of people pouring out west and settling all this territory. All right, so we have covered the causes and effects of manifest destiny. We looked at factors like the Homestead Act, the transcontinental railroads, this desire to spread American culture, this view of America as being kind of something special, that we had a destiny, a duty to spread our thinking, our way of life westward. All right, guys, so that's Manifest Destiny. It's a really, really important topic, so make sure you're familiar with it, not just in and of itself, but as a consequence of the Civil War, or excuse me, a cause of the Civil War as well. And that'll make more sense as we go through this unit in later lessons.